Kansas loses at Utah. Is this rock bottom for Bill Self and Kansas basketball?
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on? Derek Johnson here. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day. Thank you to the everydayers catching each and every show. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, and you can find us on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. On today's edition of Locked On Jayhawks, we are recapping KU's loss 74-67 in Utah as they drop another one here. And we're going to discuss the question, is this rock bottom for the Bill Self era at Kansas? I know we've, if you go back to some previous years at Kansas, there's still been worse years than this. They've had years in way the past, right? If you go back to maybe the Ted Owens era, for instance, where you missed the NCAA tournament. So for some people, it's not going to be rock bottom, but for some younger fans, it is going to be rock bottom. And I also think a lot of us have undergone some past KU football seasons which have felt like rock bottom. So again, to that notion, this is not going to be on the same level. But comparatively, yes, this does feel like rock bottom for KU in the Bill Self era. We'll get into that and specifically why. This episode of the show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. And right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins, which right now, just feel like you use it against Kansas. It's coming through if you're going against this. 74-67, Kansas falls at Utah. The Jayhawks are just, I don't think, a very good basketball team. You can look at some of the metrics and say, oh, they're ranked 12th on KenPom, or they're ranked this on I don't think it captures what this team is. I really don't. I don't think this is a top 20 team in the country. And there's just so many things wrong right now, and they fall to 17-8 on the season. They're now 8-6 in Big 12 play. They're going to be playing most likely on a Wednesday for the second straight year of the Big 12 tournament. And this is what I'm talking about when saying rock bottom for Bill Self. I mean, first of all, Bill Self has never gotten below a 4 seed at Kansas, and they came in as a 4 seed in the early bracket reveal earlier today. Now you lose this game. I think it's pretty easy to see that, they'd probably be a 5 seed right now. And you look at the finish to the schedule and say, oh, if this is the easy part of the schedule and you're losing games, then you still have Arizona and Houston and Texas Tech, probably going to lose multiple of those games to where, Kansas is probably going to be a 5, 6, 7, 8 seed, somewhere in there, depending on how they finish kind of the rest of the season. That from that standpoint, this would be the low point of the Bill Self era in terms of those components for KU. But it's just how you lost this game, I think, is a perfect summarization of why this is rock bottom in the Bill Self era at Kansas. And again, I am approaching that from a standpoint of it is an insanely high bar that he has set, and it is a little bit unfair maybe to compare to that insanely high bar because, like I said, we watched KU football for so many of those seasons under David Beatty and Charlie Weiss where that was real rock bottom. But from the Kansas basketball perspective, right, where you do adjust your expectations based on those things, this is rock bottom for that. You just lost a game to a bad team. Utah is not a very good team. They're not going to make it to the NCAA tournament. This is a team that was rated outside of the top 80 on KenPom. You just lost to a bad team in which their center was 1 for 9 on free throws. You lost to a bad team in which they shot 37% from the floor. You lost to a bad team in which had scoring droughts of 5 minutes in the first half and 6 minutes in the second half and could not score to close out that game. Kansas didn't even take the lead one time. Utah, again, not a great team. And if there's any Utah fans listening to this, I like your coach. Overall, you guys have had a solid season, getting better in the Big 12. I'm not trying to take away from it. But, Utah has no business leading Kansas 37 minutes and 14 seconds of the game while Kansas leads this game for 0 stinking seconds. And Bill Self has been calling for more energy. He did this week in the press conference. He's been calling for better responses from Kansas all season long. And every time, it has not been answered. And perfect example, you even saw it in game. He has the technical to try to get the team fired up. Didn't really get the team fired up. And instead, you look back on it and you're like, this team's not really good enough to overcome the points you have to give up on the technical. That is a problem for this team to have. And yes, part of it is Bill Self for, he doesn't go blameless here. He's the one who put together the roster, and there are a lot of flaws with the roster that has been put together for Kansas. But some of the stuff where it's oh, this guy should be playing, or this guy should be playing more, or this rotation, this lineup is better than that. I mean, I've talked about that throughout the season. I think there have been certain things you could nitpick here or there. But like, I don't know. I'm kind of to a certain point where like, does it really matter? Does it really matter what lineup they're throwing out there with the current construction of team that they have right now? I don't really think it does. Like, I think you could throw out any combination of 5 players, and this Kansas team just kind of is what they are, and they don't answer the bell. Your supposed best player, Hunter Dickinson, had kind of a no-show performance in this game in an opportunity that, you really needed him to show up. Like, you just didn't get a lot from a majority of players that hit on the court. Like, I guess props to DeJuan Harris, who did have a good game, I thought, for KU. Zeke Mayo was pretty good for Kansas overall. But it's just the lack of effort is appalling for Kansas. And I said this before, I don't think it's every player. There are some players that play with good effort. But the problem is, if you have a 5-man lineup on the court and there's even 2 players who are playing with crappy effort, it's going to make it look like everybody's playing with crappy effort. You know why? Because you can't make up for the mistakes of everybody, and then you start trying to make up for the mistakes of other people, and it leaves somebody wide open, and it just screws up everything. Even if there's one person not playing with high effort, like, it really messes things up. And it's just repeatedly over and over again. They do the same stuff. They're the same stuff in the same games happening. They don't play with energy. They lose on the road. It's just who they are. And they just refuse to shake it at this point. I think I've finally figured it out. This is what this team is. This team is a random pickup basketball team. And it's a random pickup basketball team that, despite playing more and more together over the course of the season, and in the case of, some of these guys getting to play together last season too, is just basically a brand new pickup team each and every game. Here's what I mean by that. When you play a random pickup game, let's just say you stroll to the park or the rec center, wherever you play, your pickup basketball, right? And you just join a group of random people that's just like, hey, we'll just get next. Like, we're going to go out there and have some fun, whatever. You're trying, like, you're competing, you're trying to win the game, all this sort of things. But like, it's pickup basketball. Like, you're not really going all out. Like, you don't want to get hurt. Like, I don't know. There always are the tryhards in pickup basketball, but for the most part, like, it's kind of like that. You're not quite in like 4th gear. You're maybe operating in that, like, okay, I'm trying, but I'm kind of cruising here, right? You're going to kind of like feign attempts at some threes, but are you really going to be like fully closing out and rotating on the defensive end and locking down on defense every play? Like, no, not really in pickup basketball. Offensively, you're probably going to have some players on your team who can't really shoot basketball, and there's not going to be, a ton of spacing. You're not going to be running a 5-out offense in pickup basketball. You're going to want to win. Like I said, like, you want to win when you're playing the game. But at the end of the day, for the most part, like, people, when they're playing pickup basketball, it's like, okay, this is kind of a fun way to compete and get some exercise. But like, at the end of the day, if you lose your pickup basketball game, are you going to go home that day and cry? Or are you going to go home that day and feel awful about it all day long? No, like, you're going to move past it very quickly. It's like a pickup basketball game where it's 5 people playing together for the first time. And that is every night of KU basketball right now. And at the very least, when they're on the road, like, that is the case. Like, if you want to make an argument that, like, yeah, there are certain situations where that hasn't happened. The Duke game, maybe at home against Iowa State, right? Some other ones you can point to, sure. But I think majority of the time, or way too often of a time, that is the case. And honestly, like, let me share my 2 least favorite moments of the game among it all. This is going to be like ultimate old man get off my lawn take here, but I don't really care. I think you see sometimes, like, what's that one saying? It's how you do, oh gosh, I'm completely spoiling this. How you do, like, everything is how, or how you do little things is how you do everything. Something like that. Like, again, I've completely muddled that, but how you do anything is how you do everything. Maybe that's the saying here. In that, like, even the little things, at the end of the day, like, Rylan Griffin gets knocked over. I think it was on like a 3 or ran into some. I don't remember exactly why he got knocked over. But there's like a stoppage, and nobody comes from the team to pick him up. Instead, the people who come to pick him up are David Coit, who was on the bench, and Jeremy Case, who was an assistant coach. And you see that stuff happen. And again, like, does it really matter? It's an innocuous thing, like, whatever. But it's hard not to see a thing like that happen and go watch another team who has, like, good culture right now. I watch, like, a Houston basketball or an Auburn basketball, right? One of these teams. One of those players falls over. There's multiple teammates sprinting to them to help them up. And again, this sounds like, I feel like I'm like Colin Coward having some, like, old man take, but, like, there is some truth to it in that, like, those things don't happen on teams with that high culture. And then you had Zeke Mayo go down later in the game, and like I didn't really see teammates come to help him up too. Maybe that was different because that was like an injury thing, and so I don't know. That one ends up being different. But like that Ryland Griffin one specifically really stood out to me in that like the culture just isn't there anymore. Remember when they had the streak going on and that culture was passed down team to team and it was the no pressures, no diamonds. Like that feels totally gone. We feel totally lost from that at this point in time. And beyond it all, like the execution sucks too. Like it's not just the effort. The effort is bad. The execution hasn't been great either. Like you're not scoring at a high level. This is not an entertaining brand of offensive basketball you're playing. You don't ever take advantage of anything. Like that's I know the Chiefs just got blown out in the Super Bowl, but like the biggest thing with the Chiefs is usually when another team like messes up or gives you a turnover or I don't know, has a penalty or whatever, like the Chiefs take advantage of it. Good teams find a way to take advantage of your mistakes. Houston took advantage of you missing those free throws and then throwing the ball away, right? I mean, as much as Houston won that game in a way, they also needed you to make mistakes. They had to take advantage of you making those mistakes. Good teams find a way to take advantage of other teams' mistakes. Kansas doesn't do those things. Like think about the end of the half, right? You're down 39-37. You get a rebound on a stop at the end of the half, and Marquise Passmore gets fouled. It's an opportunity for you to tie the score at the end of the half. You don't even have to, you get fouled, you get a 1-on-1, you miss the 1-on-1. So you don't grab that momentum at the end of the half. Those end of game kind of lack of scoring sequences for Utah where they don't score and you can't take advantage. You can't take the lead despite them not being able to score for, minutes and minutes on end. The intentional foul sequence, like unable to take advantage of that. Missing every layup known to man in a game where the offenses weren't great, especially in the second half. And then like unable to make a dent in kind of either of those two long scoring droughts for Utah. And so the end of the day, Kansas now has 11 Big 12 road losses. They have 13 total Big 12 they have 13 total road losses dating back to last year. And Big 12 only play, they have 11 road losses in Big 12 games dating back to last season. And I tweeted this out at D Johnson Radio, the most total losses in Big 12 play for KU over a 2-year stretch of Bill Self's time at Kansas is 11. That was from the 2017-18 season, followed by the 2018 to 2019 season combined together. They had 11 total Big 12 losses. The last two seasons of Kansas have 11 just road Big 12 losses. That doesn't even account for, some of the losses that you've had at home, like against Houston and West Virginia and so on. Now, am I being too harsh here, right? Because this is a very harsh conversation in first segment that we're having. And to a certain standpoint, like, yes, are Kansas fans spoiled for this being the worst scene, for this being rock bottom? There's probably another school. Like if you're Oklahoma State, if you're watching this show, or if you're Utah watching the show to be like, oh yeah, we won this awesome game. Like this was so cool. You're probably watching this show and you're sitting there going like, man, Kansas fans are spoiled. I would kill to be, 17-8 and be ranked 17th in the country, even though we just got an upset loss. Like those things are great. How is this rock bottom? It's just a different line, man. It just is. And so, yes, like those things are kind of true. And I probably am being a bit too harsh here, but like here's what it is to me. The way this team plays, and if you would notice, like over past episodes, like I am critical of the idea of KJ Adams in the sense of like, yeah, like should Bill Self be playing him this much? I don't know, probably not. Like I've made the comparison before that like it's like asking a hammer to be a windshield scraper. It's like, no, that tool is used for something else. But who do you blame? Do you blame the hammer or do you blame the person using it the wrong way? To me, I blame it the person using it, right? If KJ was playing this specific role and he's this good defender, like that could work. But KJ always tries his ass off. He hustles. He does everything he can to try to make his team win. So I don't blame KJ, right? Even though I think from a roster construction perspective, there are certain questions you could have for Bill Self there. But the thing where I run into is there are too many players on this team, and whether it's you're just cashing an NIL check and happy to be here, whether it is, you just don't want to get injured, whether that's just not your MO, you just don't got that dog in you, right? You just don't have that motor, whatever it is for some of these players, or you've just kind of given up on the season, or the Houston game sent you into the shadow realm, whatever it is for this Kansas team and some of the players. That is why I think I am being harsh, and I think a lot of KU fans are being harsh because, they've had the Dedrick Lawson season. People weren't happy with that. They got a 4 seed and stuff like that, but at the end of the day, I think people were able to move on from it and understand that like sometimes bad seasons do happen, or like bad to your expectation, right? This one is not getting any of that. Maybe it's just, social media has become so angry and it's become so much more rampant over the years. But like, I think there is a big part of it that it's the lack of respect almost, I think, from fans in how this team plays. The lack of consistent energy, the lack of playing for the Kansas across the front of your jersey. It is very apparent. You watch that team play defense and not sprint out on 3-point shooters and not pick up your guys when they're falling down. It is very apparent that this team, I guess, again, like I'm being harsh, but do they really care? I guess is kind of the bottom question here. And so it does kind of feel like rock bottom for KU in the Bill Self era. All right, went long in that first segment. Let's get to some game awards next. This will be maybe a little bit shorter than normal. Locked on Jayhawks. This episode of the show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. If you would have got Utah plus 6.5 before the game, you would have been sitting pretty for the remainder of it to the very end there. But of course, you could have got DeJuan Harris over points. I think it was like 9.5 coming in the game, 10.5, and clearly was able to get over that. He had himself a nice game. So right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA and the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for joining us here on Locked On Jayhawks. You can make Locked On College Basketball, Locked On College Football for your second listen every day. I am at a bit of an ends here because I don't know. What do you want to listen to if you're the fan? Hit me up at D Johnson Radio. Like, do you want us to keep talking KU basketball? Are you hopeful they're going to turn it around? Do you want us to start talking about next year's KU basketball? Do you want us to talk about KU football? Do you want us to just finish out the season and deal with the misery? I don't know, because I'm glad to keep talking about this KU basketball team the rest of the season. And, I'm going to keep watching the games. I'm going to keep talking about it to a certain standpoint, but I'll keep doing the game recaps and the game previews. But in between those, what do you want me to talk about? So at T Johnson Radio, if you have maybe an opinion there on where you want things to go. So game trophies for this one. I don't know. Do I really want to do best moment? I don't feel like this game deserves a best moment. So you know what? I'm just going to move past that. There were a couple like cool moments in the early going. The Hunter to Flory alley-oop. DeJuan was making plays early. A couple Zeke threes in the game, but yeah, I don't really want to pick one there. Worst moment of the game, lot to choose from. There was the lack of defensive effort, I think it was a lack of defensive effort, both mentally and physically, right? Mentally, maybe just not doing enough job checking defenders or getting over screens or knowing what to do on the scouting report. And then physically, just like, half a step slow to certain situations. And really all season long, this team has been half a step slow to like loose balls and things like that. And I think that really paired out in this game to the rebounding advantage, right? Utah came into this game 7th in the Big 12 in offensive rebound rate in conference games. They were 14th in defensive rebounding rate. So like, this has not been a juggernaut of a rebounding team in Utah, but in this game, they out-rebounded you by 10. They had 10 more offensive rebounds, 16-6 on the offensive rebound chart for Utah. And let's take a look. I'll actually be kind of curious here where that ranks for Utah in terms of offensive rebound rate for a game this season. Okay, it's a little lower than I would have thought. They're about middle of the pack for them. But yeah, for the Kansas defense, for their side of the ball, let's see. That was their fourth worst defensive rebound rate game of the season. Some of the other ones were Baylor and Iowa State. With a couple losses in there. They did beat TCU, and then the other Iowa State game was also in the top 5. So 2-3 in such situations. But I think you saw the situation there. And if we're specifically talking about like a certain play, I mean, this is probably the worst moment of the game. So you do hack a leveling or whatever you want to call it, which we actually mentioned in the preview. So if you're an everydayer, you might have caught, that's a possible strategy, right? And he only goes 1 of 9 from the free throw line, and you get the situation you want. He misses the free throw, but you can't get the rebound. And then they put a shot up, and you can't get the rebound again. And I feel like, okay, again, like I put this out on Twitter too. Sometimes I feel like Hunter Dickinson is the hungry hippo. You know the game where like you have the little balls like going around and you have the hippo and it snatches whatever. It's like if the ball comes to where the hippo is, you press the button in time, you're snatching the ball, like it's gonna get that ball, right? Hunter Dickinson standing there, he's gonna do a good job boxing out. He's a big guy, he's gonna grab the ball. But if that ball is, there's a limitation on how far the hungry hippo, like it's locked in there. There's a limitation on how far he can reach out for a ball. If it is outside that limitation of where his legs are planted and his arms can reach, he ain't getting the ball. And you combine that with, again, KJ hustles, but he just hasn't been a good rebounder in his career. So that's always been kind of a weird combination of the two. And then Flory's been a really good offensive rebounder, but he's struggled on the defensive glass. Yeah, man, that was not great for KU to say the least. And then KJ fouls out as a result of it too, to which KJ didn't have a great offensive game. Oddly enough, both his buckets were like mid-range shots. I thought he actually had a good defensive game amid all the chaos for KU, but it just didn't really matter there. Just everything. The Zeke Mayo turnover off the back of Flory Badunga, showing the lack of, I don't know, cohesiveness, I guess you would say, of this Kansas team. The Zeke Mayo injury scare, good to see that he came back at the very least. Maybe that's the best moment of the game. The Zeke Mayo did come back into the game. That it's like, okay, at least he was okay. Just this season as a whole, I don't know, for worst moment of the game. Pauline side of the game, I mean, if you go to the offensive rebounds, that would certainly be a big one as part of this. Going back to the turnovers, Utah only had 7 in this game. That's been something we've been harping on. Kansas has been a horrendous team at forcing turnovers. That continued in this game, and you got outscored 22-7 in points off turnovers by Utah. So certainly that's one that sticks out from this one. The other one that would stick out to me, this one I find actually kind of funny. Kansas shot 38% from 3. Utah shot 32%. I mean, based on how the game started, like that one actually shocked me when I looked at it. But I think the most appalling side of the game, it has to be that Utah led for 37 minutes and 14 seconds. Kansas led for not a single second. Okay, offensive MVP for KU. I'm going to go, you can go Zeke Mayo, 15 points, 4 of 9 shooting. He was 5 of 6 at the foul line, 3 assists to 2 turnovers. I'm going to go with DeJuan Harris, though. 14 points for DeJuan, 6 of 12 from the floor, 4 rebounds, 4 assists. In a game where I think the lack of energy was more apparent in the first half. Like the second half to me was more about, it was lack of energy rebounding the second half, but the defensive energy overall got better outside of the rebounding second half. But the second half was more about a lack of execution, I think. I think the first half was more about a lack of energy, not getting out to shooters and a lot of those different things. But when that was happening, DeJuan Harris was trying hard and he was going for it. And this is what I was saying earlier, like, if you have a game where 3 of the 5 guys out there are hustling and playing hard, but 2 of them are not, it's going to look like everybody's not playing hard. And that's an unfortunate part of this for KU. But I think DeJuan gets offensive MVP. Defensive MVP of the game, I don't. Hunter Dickinson had 4 blocks, so I guess he gets a little bit of credit for that. Kansas, like I said, continues to not really force turnovers and force steals. I guess you could say the free throw line to Lovering would certainly be up there. And he was only 1 for 6 from the floor. So I guess honestly, like you could say Hunter was the defensive MVP just in terms of that. But that was not his best performance. So I don't know who else you would go with just in terms of, like I said, I thought KJ did some stuff covering up for other players on the defensive end of the court. And that's the other thing that stinks for KJ, that like that lack of effort thing, somebody can completely mess something up and KJ covers for them and it just looks like, oh, they were just switching or they were just rotating here. And it's like, no, that wasn't the plan. He just went and covered it. So I don't know. I guess I'll give him defensive MVP for this one for KU, but I don't think the MVPs really matter too much in this one. I'll be very curious to hear Bill Self's comments after I record this podcast of what he'll say after the game. All right, what's next for KU? We'll get to that on the other side. Finishing things up on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks, what is next for the Jayhawks? So they're going to be at BYU on Tuesday, which now, I mean, this becomes incredibly much more difficult now because this was the game that was supposed to be the easier one to win. BYU is an incredibly tough place to play. They're a good team, and they space the floor and shoot threes. And so if you lose that one too on Tuesday, you will basically have spoiled your opportunity to, in a more winnable stretch, win more of these games than you wind up losing in a weird way, right? Like the stretch between at Kansas State all the way through at Colorado upcoming, like that's kind of the case. There is an interesting hypothetical where it's like if you lose at BYU, you'd be 17-9, 8-7 in Big 12 play. Let's say you beat Oklahoma State and then lost at Colorado, which, I mean, given the road struggles, is not entirely impossible. I mean, we didn't see Kansas just absolutely hammer Colorado, right? Then that would all of a sudden give you 10 losses. What is the record between the two home games, Texas Tech, Arizona, and then at Houston? Is it 1-2? You split them at home and you lose at Houston. So then you'd be sitting at 12 losses. Then you lose in the Big 12 tournament, 13 losses. Like, it is hard for me to fathom that Kansas could lose 13 games with a Bill Self team. And that is entirely possible. Now, is some of that pessimistic and some of the picking? Yeah, but it could still be close to that. It could still be 12, you know? So, yeah, that's not great, obviously, for KU. I will say, if you can win at BYU, it doesn't save the season. It doesn't turn things around. It doesn't change, honestly, like completely the way I feel about this team, but it certainly would make you feel a little bit better, and it would be a little bit of a Band-Aid in that if you would have said coming into this, you were going to go 1-1 in the two road trips at Utah and at BYU, you would have thought you lost to BYU, and I guess it would flip that a little bit. But, like, again, it's not going to completely all of a sudden change your opinion on this team. It'll just be kind of a Band-Aid to feeling a little bit better until there can be a sustained level of play and energy that you see from this team over time. So I guess an important one on Tuesday at BYU, that's for sure. That'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page. Apologies if this was more of a negative episode. We will be back on Monday. I was hoping it was going to be a fun episode, but we're going to be joined by Graham Doran, who does some great bracketology work on Monday. Obviously, KU was a 4 seed in that NCAA tournament reveal earlier this morning. We're going to talk what's the impact of the Utah loss, what is the upcoming schedule provide for this team, what's like the lowest seed they could possibly get, what's the highest seed they could possibly get. So we're going to get into some fun conversation with Graham. I hope you join us on Monday, and you can do that anywhere you get your podcast or on our YouTube page. See you then on Locked On Jayhawks.